Okay, good afternoon again. Our next presenter is Ms. Jacqueline Lewis. She's a senior lecturer in the School of Education at Roehampton University in London. For over 20 years, she has worked in teacher education, training student teachers to teach primary science. She was a senior lecturer in primary science education at Exeter University, then at Kingston University. She currently teaches undergraduate and postgraduate students at the University of Roehampton. She's also very active in the diaspora as a member of JET UK, that's the Jamaica Education Taskforce in the United Kingdom. And being passionate about science education and widening the participation, as a member of JET UK, she serves as the secretary and she is in charge of the STEM program. She participated in the Creative Features Jamaica project last year, delivering STEM workshops to the primary teachers and engaging students in science. Ladies and gentlemen, teaching teachers to teach STEM. Here is Ms. Jacqueline Lewis.
You're live, Jackie.
It's all right. It's just like the video isn't working.
Oh. Working.
Okay, right. I'm fine now. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So, as has been introduced, my name's Jacqueline Lewis, and I lecture at the University of Roehampton. As I've said, I've been in teacher education for many, many years, and I am, like others, a volunteer. I volunteer for the Jamaica Education Taskforce, and last year in March and April we travelled out to Jamaica to run a series of STEM workshops. My role in that was to teach teachers how to teach science, and the photograph that I've used throughout, I'm not sure if any of the people who were at the workshops are here today, is a part of that process that we did. I think this is at Barton's Primary, if my memory is correct, in St. Catherine. Okay, so I thought I'd start by a speech by President Barack Obama that he made on the 11th of February 2016, and I think you can all see that, and I will just read it to you. So one of the things I've been focused on as president, and I've got people in the way, I'm going to have to move you, I'm afraid, if I can get these at the top, is how we create an all hands on deck approach to science, technology, engineering and maths. We need to make this a priority to train an army of new teachers in these subject areas and to make sure that all of us as a country are lifting up these subjects for the respect that they deserve. So we have a commitment from the American, former president, first Black president, to STEM education. Unfortunately, I don't have access to the Jamaica policy, but essentially around the world, STEM education has become more and more important. And my role, as I said, I'm here to talk very much around science in particular. Even though I'm based in the UK, we have similar, it's going to be surprising, but we have some challenges around science education. And because I'm in a primary setting, not all of our schools, even though in the UK we're a developing country, not all of the schools actually cover and do science. It's quite interesting. It tends to be more in schools where it's more affluent, and what we're having to do, we have an inspection framework called Ofsted, and the Ofsted framework is changing so that all schools will now have to cover science across the primary age range, across the 3 to 11 age range. So moving on, so Barack Obama would like to meet the new desire for an extra million STEM graduates by 2022, which is only 2 years ago. And I recognize this is in America, but this still has an implication for STEM, STEM more broader. And one of the issues is that I know within the UK and also different parts of the world that women and also minorities are Black children. I can talk about the UK context because that's where I work. they are often denied access to STEM education. And that's a number of reasons. They're usually in schools that are not as well resourced. Their human capital side of things, teachers may not necessarily be as well qualified in the schools that they attend. In the UK, we have a tiered system where you might be entered for a lower tier exam. We call it a foundation. We call it a GCSE, which is equivalent to your CXC. And so what it means is they do not have those opportunities. But we have an opportunity to really focus on engaging children and enabling them to have a STEM education. So how do we do that? We have to improve teaching and support active learning. So I jumped to the opportunity to come out to Jamaica and to do some teacher training, which is what I do every day. So I was doing something that is very much within my comfort zone. It was good, and I have to admit, it was probably one of the highlights of my time professionally. So within the context of improving STEM teaching, we have to engage in practices that are active learning strategies, helping children to engage and to think and to problem solve. So in my sessions, what I try to do is I try to have very much an engaging approach, an active approach, and a hands-on approach. So in effective science teaching, I think I've kind of mentioned that in passing. In an effective science lesson, we have conceptual knowledge. So we have the main subjects, your biology, chemistry, physics, your knowledge and understanding. So that is core to your lesson. But how we engage children is that we use the inquiry skills. Now, these skills are taken from your scheme that you have. The inquiry skills are important skills, and they encompass the science curriculum. And within science, what you will always do is you will be teaching inquiry alongside knowledge and understanding. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go through the actual inquiry skills, some of them, so that we get a sense of what they are, because these are really important. Science, effective science teaching is not about just giving information. It is about developing those skills alongside the knowledge and understanding. So for the primary practitioners who are in early years or in the 3 to 7 age range, the skill of observation involves using all the senses. And so that's hearing, smelling, tasting as appropriate, touching. And so the context for that are collections, allowing children to touch, to use Play-Doh, to develop their fine motor skills, to experience different materials. There's a lot of focus on observation as a skill within the teaching of science, within effective science teaching, particularly in early years. We also have manipulating, which I've kind of hinted, which means that the children are, as I said, they're manipulating the Play-Doh. They might be putting objects in water to sort, classify in terms of floating and sinking. So classification is putting things into groups on the basis of their properties. Within your scheme, you've got really nice examples of classifying into solids, liquids, and gases. You classify plants into flowering plants and non-flowering plants. You classify forces into things that are contact forces or non-contact forces like magnetism, and contact forces like, if you like, air resistance, which is a force that we're going to talk about. We then move on to describing, and I'll say a little bit about that later on. Now, measuring is also an inquiry skill. In the early year setting, we start from non-standard measures. So we might use hand spans, we might use feet, we might use sticks, we might use hand spans, cubits, you name it, in terms of non-standard measures, moving more to centimeters, meters, using a thermometer as a way of introducing that skill of measuring. We also, within science, we identify patterns. So we're looking for, to make generalizations. So we might, if I'm going to give an example, we might be doing a friction investigation where we're allowing things to move over different surfaces. So we're looking for patterns. So one car moved further on one surface than it did on another. The skill of predicting is also important as well. And within prediction, we're just making a sort of, you like, a guess, what we think will happen. Whereas hypothesizing is a little bit more sophisticated in that it is making a prediction with a reason. So in terms of our example in the picture, we've got the teachers dropping the parachutes and hypothesizing which parachute would land the quickest with a reason. Then we've got planning a fair test, and I'll say a little bit about that a bit later on. We've got investigating, and they are investigating, they're carrying out a whole investigation. Recording, generally recording, we are in an age of technology, we can use tablets, taking photographs, we can record actually through writing, we can draw, we can do oral, well, you won't necessarily record orally, but you might take a recording, or reporting. And reporting, what you really want to do, particularly with young children, is you want them to be able to actually talk about what they have learnt. So pre-COVID, what we would do, we get the children working in groups and also explaining at the end of the investigation or the task what they actually did. I say pre-COVID because with social distancing, things are going to be a little bit more difficult. So in terms of teaching teachers to teach STEM, as I said, I teach primary school teachers, and in our lesson planning, some of this is quite basic, but this is what underpins good science teaching. You have to be very clear about your objectives. You have to know what it is you want the children to learn in the lesson. So within this lesson, we're looking at the concept of air resistance. The lesson isn't about parachutes. That's not the theme of the lesson, but the lesson is about air resistance as a force that slows down objects as they move through the air. And then we will decide which inquiry skills will be best at integrating into that lesson. As a teacher, I will make that decision of what it is I would like those children to learn in terms of the inquiry skills. So I've identified carrying out a fair test, and I'll explain that in a moment, measuring time using standard measures. So I'd be getting the children, this activity is carried out in grade 5. So I'd be getting the children to time using a stopwatch, and I'd get them to take averages. So I'd at least 2, if not 3 measures, and then they can take a mean, either the middle value or divide by 3 and get your actual time in seconds, or it should be in seconds. I was going to say minutes, but it's not likely to be minutes. So we start with our lesson objective, what we want the children to learn in terms of the knowledge and understanding, and then the inquiry skills. And if you remember, I've said that the inquiry skills within this lesson is very much around fair testing. And this is a format that if you are a primary practitioner, you can use this to get the children to discuss the kinds of investigations that they might do in your lesson. So we are investigating the impact of air resistance on moving objects, or what happens when we use parachutes or something to that effect. The variables are, those are the things that you could change. And in terms of science, we're looking at the independent variable, the things we change. So what I would be doing, I would have this as a big sheet, and I'd be asking the children to give me the ideas of the things that they could change within the investigation. I'm not going to tell them, but I've just listed them so you can see. In terms of making parachutes, we could change the length of the string. We can change the size of the parachute or the size of the canopy. We can change the type of material for the canopy, or we can change the type of string. So if you have Post-its, you can put them into the boxes where it says the variables we could change, and that is the independent variable. That's the thing that you're changing through the investigation. then what are we going to measure? So in other words, what are we going to be measuring at the end of the investigation? So what is the effect on of the independent variable on the dependent variable? So the variables we could measure or observe, and that would be the speed of the fall of the parachute, or rather it should be the time it takes for the parachute to fall to the ground, because speed is a measure of distance divided by time. So if I wanted the children to measure speed, they would have to know the distance from which they dropped the parachute, divide it by the time, and then they'd get the answer. So moving down, you'll say we will change the size of the canopy, we will measure the time it takes for the parachute to fall to the ground. So then our investigation question becomes, if we change the size of the canopy, what will happen to the time it takes for the parachute to fall to the ground? So you can see that I've taken you through that process because I want you to come up with your own investigation question. I want the children to come up with their own investigation question. I'm not telling the children exactly what they have to investigate, but what I'm doing is I'm creating a context, I'm creating an opportunity within an area where they are going to tell me what they can change. And then what actually happens is I can use that to form an investigation. So in terms of active learning, the children are involved. I'm not telling them exactly what to do, but what I would have to do is I'd have to make sure they have the skills in order to carry out the whole process. So you will see your question. So the question going back is, when I change the size of the canopy, what will happen to the time taken for the parachute to fall? What's my prediction? What's my guess? What I think will happen? My hypothesis, remember my hypothesis is making an I think because statement. I think that the larger parachute will fall to the ground more slowly because it is more impacted by air resistance. And then how I will carry out the investigation. And you can see from the teachers in the picture, they've made the parachutes. I provided string, newspaper, fabric, sellotape, lots of different things so that you can actually make it. And that's really exciting in terms of active learning, because you actually allow the children to carry out the activities. So what we will measure, and that's the speed, the time it takes for the parachute to fall to the ground. What we will change, which is linked back to the last slide, which was the actual size of the canopy. And then what we will keep the same to make it a fair test, all the other variables, will keep the length of the string, the type of the string, the type of fabric, for it to be a fair test. Record the results, and then at the end, explain what happened using scientific knowledge and understanding. Now that is a whole investigation. Not all of the science curriculum lends itself to a whole investigation, but throughout our teaching of science, the children should be engaging in some kind of hands-on practical to help them learn about the concepts. Science teaching is not just talking from a book. It's really about doing those practical experiences and giving the children an opportunity to explore and learn through hands-on. Now, I realized, having put this up, that this was pre-COVID. So I put, during the lesson, provide opportunity for the pupils to work in groups. Well, that is before social distancing, and talk about the science. Really important. If you are from a background of social constructivism, you will know that Vygotsky advocates that children work in groups and they engage in talk. And part of that talk is they work with a more knowledgeable other, an MKO, and that peer-peer interaction means that they learn from each other. You come along as a teacher and you will explore, and you'll give them questioning, and your role as a teacher is to help them to think about the science, think about what they're going to do, and to ask them questions and really enable them to explain their ideas. I know that when I'm at work, what can happen is that when I walk along and ask, turn up and listen, that my students become quiet. And I'm sure that maybe that might happen. But it's really about getting the actual children, the students, to really focus on the activity and the science and what they're actually doing. And you'll notice that I've asked for you to ask open person-centered questions. So that might be, why do you think that happened? And you'll notice I'm not asking for a specific answer, i.e. a closed question. What is the name of the force that slows moving objects down? That has its place, but what I'm really asking the children to do is I'm asking them to tell me what they think, and it's okay to be wrong. I want to know their thinking. I want to know their reasoning. I want to understand where they're coming from. Now, in terms of progression, what's interesting is when you teach science long enough, you will know that many of the activities that are done in primary school can also be done in high school, or in the UK, we say secondary school. And we have a progression in terms of the skills. Remember I said the science skills are really important. So we start off, and the first question is something that you can ask all children, and particularly children in the early years. So you tell me, what do you notice about the balls? What do you notice about the parachutes? What do you notice about the rocks? Tell me what you notice about the objects floating and sinking. A fairly open question that allows the children just to tell you what they notice, what they've seen. I'm just asking this very open question, and then I can probe as I go through. So the first question is very much based on observation using the senses. Then I ask then we can go on to describing. So what I'm looking at is a progression in terms of explanations and in terms of those questions. So the smaller parachute fell more quickly than the larger parachute. I'm not asking a reason. Then we go on to an explanation. And then we go on to an explanation using scientific knowledge. And I would say that that is a really good progression. So within the explanation using scientific knowledge and understanding, I would be expecting that at the top end of I almost said key stage 2, which is what we say in the UK, in grades 5 and 6, and definitely in grades 7, 8 and 9. And we say key stage 3 in the UK. But you really want the children to begin to develop their understanding and to use scientific knowledge as far as possible. So it's important also to model correct science vocabulary. Now, in your primary curriculum, I noticed that you don't teach electricity, whereas in the UK we do. And the reason I've used that is the word conductor, but you might use the term thermal conductor or thermal insulator. And you want the children to understand what the word means. So it's more important. So for example, if I was talking about electricity, I'd be saying, we want to test which material will allow electricity to pass through. I wouldn't necessarily use the word conductor immediately. It's not that it's wrong, it's just so that the children understand what I mean by the specific word. So I'm really modeling the use of correct vocabulary. And modeling, you're just sharing with the children, telling them what the words are that you expect them to use: air resistance, force, gravity, and so on. So they really get that understanding. And it's not that you're kind of just, you're doing it rote learning, but you're really using it in context. It goes without saying, carrying out hands-on activity. Science isn't just hands-on, because it would be wrong to say that if you're doing hands-on, you're doing science, because that's not actually how it is. You have to work in a particular way. But it is important to be developing those inquiry skills. If the only thing that you take away from this presentation is map the inquiry skills across the whole of your science curriculum and ensure that you're developing those inquiry skills through practical hands-on activity. And then you make sense of the science concepts being delivered by recording in some way. And you might decide you just want the children to tell you about them rather than recording it formally. Okay, so remember the 4 C's. So within your curriculum, we have the concepts of creativity, and this activity allowed for creativity because they were able to make the parachutes themselves. Critical thinking, absolutely, because they have to, you have to hypothesize, you have to explain, you have to think, you definitely communicate, and you lots and lots of opportunity for collaboration, although this was pre-COVID-19. So I know that within my context, we have to decide with social distancing, it's not as easy for the children or the students to collaborate. But that doesn't mean that you can't have collaboration through discussion, even if they're not necessarily working closely together. Okay, so good practice in primary science teaching then. So this is the second thing that I'd like you to remember. So the first thing is the inquiry skills, ensuring that those are developed throughout your teaching, your hands-on practical. Although, for example, a topic like the earth and space, you wouldn't necessarily be able to carry out an investigation, but what you would be able to do is to use a globe. The children might be doing research using the internet. Engagement, really, really important. I know that, I think, sorry, I can't remember both of your names, but our robotics gentleman talked about engagement. I know that children are engaged through active learning. I've seen children spend the whole lesson just exploring what happens when you put things in water, exploring floating and sinking. Putting their hands in corn flour, I think the Americans, you call it cornstarch and water. Mixing it up and putting their hands in it and squeezing it and allowing it to go through their fingers. Putting vinegar or acid into baking soda and placing a balloon over the container and watching the carbon dioxide gas be given off. It's engagement, engagement, engagement. Really making sure that those contexts that we're giving the children are interesting, are imaginative, are exciting. What you might be even do is you might have a mystery bag. You might have a little bag and you place an object in the bag and you get the children to put their hands in the bag and to explain what it, not explain what it is, but to use language to describe what it is and see if they can work out what it is. It's really important to engage children. So those contexts, and this is particularly important for little ones, those contexts for learning are important. Imaginative contexts, original contexts, things that they can relate to. Jamaica is very rich in fruit and vegetables. You can explore fruit in your classroom, what it tastes like, what it smells like, using all the senses, all of those experiences. It goes without saying that you use real objects as far as possible. So I know it may be a bit more challenging in terms of resourcing, but if you can get hold of rocks, if you can get hold of plants from the outdoors, if you can get hold of flowers, obviously flowers are parts of plants, but really focusing on those real objects to make it more interesting, so that children have things to touch, to smell, to feel. Touch and feel obviously is the same thing. Then developing prior knowledge, so really focusing on what they know, what they bring to the lesson. So building on that constructivist approach. So finding out what they know through those questions that you ask, through pictures that you might give them, and really allowing them to tell you what they know. And I know one of the things that we're very big on in terms of in the British context is the notion of talk for learning. So we are really trying to get children to engage in discussion. So there's a lot of group work, a lot of talking about the lesson, the science. So you're putting children into smaller groups. And as I said, this is pre-COVID-19. And what you're doing is really helping them to understand and challenge each other, very much that social constructivist building on what Vygotsky mentioned as well. And then the use of technology. We might be using data loggers. Obviously, robotics is an example of technology. Also, thermometers, which are infrared thermometers, things like that, if you have access to them. And to conclude, science lessons should be enjoyable with a focus on hands-on practical. Children should be engaged in relevant activity promoting inquiry learning. And I will just end with a quote from your Prime Minister, and everyone can read that.
Give them a few minutes to read. And ladies and gentlemen, you have your questions. Post them in the chat or raise your hand using the raise hand feature in Zoom. And Jackie, can you remove your virtual screen because we can hardly see your face? Didn't want to interrupt your presentation earlier on, but if not, it's okay. We just wanted your Jamaican people to see who you are.
Hang on a minute.
Yeah.
I
can stop sharing.
Sorry?
You want me to stop sharing?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I first want to thank Miss Jacqueline Lewis, done an awesome job with science education. I personally love science. I've been teaching science now for over 10 years, and I love it, because it's always new discoveries constantly in science. So this is straight up my alley. I endorse this.
I did realize that with the presentation, but you know, I can't see how I did that. So I'll have to, I'm sorry if you can't see me. I'll just have
it's
to.
Okay. We see your beautiful face right in there somewhere. It's fine. We have some questions here. Let's get from Miss Riley first. Miss Riley, unmute and ask your question, please. Can unmute. All right, Miss Riley. Okay, there you go. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm hearing.
Okay.
Just to say a good presentation, and I was wondering, I'm a grade 1 teacher, and all along I've been saying, how can STEM go across to grade 1? But when I listen to the presentation now, I realize that quite a number of the things that I was doing, it's really STEM.
Yes.
But I didn't really put it as STEM. But now I do understand, and it only propels me now to go back and to impart what I've learned with others as a supervising teacher.
Good, good. Yes, it's really those inquiry skills. I think that what we probably don't do enough, and it's the same in the UK, is it might surprise you, it's the one bit of practice that we don't necessarily do very well, which is we're very good at the knowledge, but it's those inquiry skills, it's the observation. And I think if you're an early years practitioner, you're very much around developing children's language, and you give them things to talk about, and you give them things to touch, and you're really using those senses. And so it's very much that sensory approach.
All right, thank you, Miss Riley. Miss Anderson, Shakira Anderson, unmute and ask your question. You can unmute. There you go.
Good afternoon. Actually, I wasn't asking a question. I was just trying to type excellent presentation.
Oh, very good.
All right.
Okay. Thank you so much. Ms. Robinson, you can unmute, ask your question.
Yes, afternoon to you. I am a specialist teacher in the high school. And what happened is that as specialist teacher, we are not trained to do lesson plans. So that's something that you learn on your own time.
Okay.
So what I'm asking is that when is the next scheduled STEM? I can't find the word. When is the next scheduled STEM lesson plan training? I would love to be a part of that.
I think for me, if you can let me have a copy of your lesson plan, then I would probably, what I might have to do, hang on, I don't know where I've done here. Hang on a minute.
I'm hearing you.
Yeah, if I can see your planning, then I can probably help you with that, because what we have in the UK is hang on a minute, I don't know what I've done here. Yeah, what we do in the UK is our teachers don't necessarily do planning.
Okay.
So, but we do teach them the planning at work because they have to be able to plan.
All right. So I would love a copy of your email.
Do you know what I'll do is I'll put it on the end of the presentation. I must admit I completely forgot to do it.
Thank you.
And that's okay, Jackie, it's fine. And thank you, Miss Annis. It's totally fine. We're going to have the contacts of everybody on our website, JDTAN.org, when everything is finished, okay? And all the presentations and so on. Also, keep in mind that at the beginning of this program today, we stated the 7 subcommittees under the Educational Taskforce. Totally, you're fine. And one of those subcommittees is the Instructional Planning Collaboration Subcommittee. And under the leadership of Miss Thomasella Smith, we're going to be doing some workshops, because this is not a workshop. So we're going to do workshop in August for all those backward designs and so on. So she's gonna call a meeting soon, and we host something like this for everybody. So Jackie will be on to provide some guidance in that. So don't worry, I see a lot of comments on that they want follow up. So we know you want follow up, and that is the reason why we created these departments, if you will, in the Education Task Force to provide that for you. All right, let's go over to Shamar, the person known as Shamar. You can unmute and ask your question, please. Unmute. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. That hand raise was by accident. I didn't even realize my hand was up. But excellent presentation. I'm just listening and enjoying myself.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Let's see. Yen, Miss Yen. I can unmute.
Okay,
Yes.
good afternoon. I'm a language and literature teacher, so how I incorporate STEM in my teaching, I teach at all boys school.
Okay.
And what I do is, for poetry, we did a poem on the kite.
Okay.
And what I did, I'll enable the boys to construct their own kites.
Brilliant.
And we did a session where they tested their kites, and after that they wrote a poem based on their experience. And then we did the poem, The Kite. So,
yeah, that's good.
You know, yeah, so in thinking that, you know, you're a language and literature teacher, it would not be relevant in your teaching. You know, it's good to incorporate some of that, especially for boys who, you know, are not interested in reading. So that your presentation was quite helpful.
Yeah, I think the reality is that within our context, with the way we give instructions in the UK, particularly in primary schools, we don't focus on giving the children things to read. So we will show them how to do things, and a lot of the actual things we have, we use pictures. So you'll notice, I mean, obviously I was reading from aspects of the presentation, but the way that we model things is very visual, so that you would just have pictures so you can talk through, because the children generally can't necessarily access the reading. And one of the reasons, not that I'm necessarily anybody in the ministry, but one of the reasons why you have quite a lot of disruption in the schools is that for those children who can't read, what they do is they learn that it's a way of avoiding the work. So it's really about trying to take away the accessing the curriculum as if the children were really young and they can't read. So you find ways of actually helping them. And obviously as they get older, they have to learn to read, but the fact that you can't read doesn't mean you can't access the curriculum, if that makes sense. Sorry, it's a bit long-winded the way I said that.
Okay, thank you. Go over to Miller. Oh, that's Javon. Unmute yourself, Javon. Jackie, you want to share? You're sharing something?
Hi, good afternoon.
Yeah, go on. Yes, ask your question.
I'm Shark McLeave, and I teach at a primary school.
Okay.
And I was particularly impressed. For years, I've taught at the grade 5 level, and this topic of force and buoyance, even with her speaking about the use of the term conductor, this is a topic for grade 5. And if you know, with the new curriculum, there's a new section called resource and technology. They're trying to cause us as teachers to be more open to this STEM approach. And I found this very, very, very effective in the teaching of this topic. So I was really, really impressed. So I want to thank you for the presentation. But another question, in terms of training teachers at the primary level, will there be anything in particular for us?
I think what happened, we were planning, we being the Jamaica Education Taskforce, so essentially I volunteer, obviously I'm not in Jamaica. Last year we came out to Jamaica in March and April to run science workshops. I did one in St. Catherine, 2 in Kingston, 1 in Portland, and we were planning to come out in March. But because of COVID-19, it didn't happen. So last year was the first year that I went out to Jamaica and did the workshop. And the picture that the photographs that you saw was essentially the sessions that I ran. I obviously ran more sessions, but I used forces and obviously developed some of the ideas that I did last year. And I wanted to use pictures. And I specifically chose forces because there isn't a lot of expensive equipment, because I know one of the challenges can be in Jamaica that you just haven't got the physical resources,
right,
the same way that we've got them in the UK. So I chose a topic where you didn't really need to have lots of expensive things. I mean, for example, I brought out a Newton meter because I wanted teachers to measure the difference between mass and weight. And quite rightly, I didn't know this, but some of the teachers said to me,
never saw it before.
yeah, they've never handled it before. So it was a bit of a shock to me, because to me, how do you teach
force and not
without a Newton meter? So
exactly.
I'm like, so I'm learning, but to me, it's about, in a way, I mean, it's not my decision, but those could be bought in bulk and sold to the schools at quite a not too expensive price. But you know, that's not my decision. It's just that if you're going to do if you want to have STEM education, you have to have the basic equipment. So sorry?
That is indeed true, and that's one of the things. I am for project-based and STEM learning, but in order for us to do greater things and for things to be more practical, yes, we have a few resources and we've been using the resources that we have. But for example, taking it to another level for students to not only understand but also write off their understanding requires teachers to be in the know. How am I going to impress upon you if I really have never experienced it before? So it is indeed a challenge, and I just want to thank you for coming and presenting in this manner, and thank you for answering my question. I do hope that we could dialogue some more, especially I teach at a rural school, and rural schools are really under-resourced. We don't have enough resources. And I just want to big up all the rural school teachers who are in here, and we're really pushing and pressing. Hi, Miss Thompson. But I am really, teachers are important and knowledge is important. And as we learn, unlearn and relearn, I just think this is a great way to do it.
Yeah, which parish are you from?
I live in St. James and I work in Hanover. Okay.
Because we couldn't make it to Hanover last year, but I know that we're hoping to go that way when we come out to Jamaica. We had to go somewhere, because I think what happened 3 years ago, Mr. Seymour Mattis, who's the chair of JET UK, and Miss Dr. Sunday Papaola from Imperial College came out and ran practical hands-on workshops for the children, grade 5 and grade 10. And they've done that for 2 years. And because I joined JET in 2018, I went out last year, 2019, and as I said, we plan to go out this year. And we do try to show you the sorts of things that you can do. But we are hoping to come out again, but it's just a matter of, post-COVID.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, what's her name? Sharaki. Miss Lewis, there's another question. Let me unmute. Miss Russell, you're on. Miss Russell, unmute. Yeah,
yes,
there you go.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Very impactful presentation, Miss Lewis. One of the questions I want to ask is it possible to have a contact number for you? So, because I am a STEM educator myself, and some of the challenges that we are exposed to on a daily basis is the limited resources we have in our school. But I personally believe that we can use what we have to make a difference. Sometimes even without the Newton meter, as the person was saying a while ago, I still think that we can use a lot of the resources we have presently in our grasp to make things as effective as possible. So one of the things I'd love is a contact number from you in terms of the work you're doing and when you plan to come back to Jamaica so that we can actually get the ball running. Thank you.
Jackie? All right, I think she's frozen, but to get you the answer to that question, we have, Jackie is in our network, so we'll get the information out, and whatever we're doing, either virtually or in person when COVID has passed, then we will notify the ministry and also JTA. So you'll know exactly what we're doing.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Yes, let me see if we can get a few more. If your question is content, I might be able to answer just a little bit of it specific to Jackie because we lost her for a little bit. Shernet, see if you can find Jackie if she's gonna log in again. Let me get Mr. Gordon. Gareth Gordon, you can unmute.
Okay.
Yes.
I really want to thank Miss Jacqueline for that lovely presentation. As the teacher mentioned, I'm a rural school teacher too. Are you hearing me?
Yes, clearly, yes.
Okay. And I really love that STEM approach, that science. My students get excited about manipulating and doing those stuff, and I'm excited about that too. I'm just thinking about this post-COVID situation now, where social distancing, all the precautions. How can we engage students with the same result? It means that more resources have to be allocated because persons have to maybe personalize their tools or equipment. How do we get that across as teachers? How do we manage those things and get resources?
Right.
Yeah, that's my concern.
Right, and yeah, that's a very good question because we went virtual because of this situation. Earlier on in April, May, thereabout, the Education Taskforce have had several trainings with different schools in Jamaica for the same purpose, to highlight some of the areas in technology that you can use to enhance learning, either in science or math or any other area. As a matter of fact, the next presenter who is coming on, Dr. Joe Waller, is about tricks and tools of online and remote learning. So he's going to expound on that a whole lot more. But we have met with quite a few teachers, hundreds of them, to talk about and show them ways they can use like Zoom platform to manage it. Because attending a seminar or a class on Zoom is totally different from managing it technically and then teach the content. It's very difficult. Yeah, so you need, as a matter of fact, teachers really need a set of skills. they don't just know their content anymore. They cannot just know the content. They have to know technical skills now, and pair those with the content in order to reach students. But we're going to expound on it in the next presentation. It's a very, very good question, Mr. Gordon. Let's go somebody with the term Christ for me. Unmute yourself, please. Christ for me. You know, why didn't put your first and last name? Go on,
Yes,
ask your question.
present. Yes.
Yes.
Present
Yes.
afternoon. Sylvester is the name.
Okay.
All right. I have been using STEM. I learned about the microscience project, and from that point on, I've used it to be an additional motivator to my students. However, initially I started it with a small class, which is just 23 people, because when you go to 35, 40, it gets a little bit more difficult to manage. And what it has done for me is that, well, I teach from grade 8 all the way to upper 6. I do it in grade 8. When the students come to grade 9, because the other teachers don't do it, you know, they want to come to my class and so on and so forth. So I started it the first year, and the second year, all the integrated science, I shared it with them. And so all the students do it. And then it was a very, very good competition. What it has done for me has been very, very good. I make what is called the carbon dioxide car, which is just a used plastic bottle with some baking soda, vinegar, and water. So at the grade 8, I just use it and they measure the distance and so on. At grade 10, they measure the distance, they measure the time. They could also use it in chemistry to talk about what reaction was taking place. And also you can also collect the gas to determine if the gas is lighter than air and so on and so forth. So STEM has been very, very good. Additionally, as long as you're creative, you will find additional ways, because I also used it not to go horizontal, but to go vertical. So I turn the car into a rocket.
Right.
Which gives them the upward force. So it is very, very good. And well, I'm in both STEM and robotics.
Yes, that's very good.
But, it's
very good.
very, very good to use at this level to motivate students. For me, I think I'm a pro Zoomer, because I have taken Zoom to the other level. I'm sure that whenever you're teaching, if someone has to be fiddling with the screen, it is a distraction.
Yes.
So I could share with them what I have done to make my Zoom very, very interesting. One, I use dual screen, which is an additional screen. So the Zoom, like the Zoom control is on my second screen. My participants on the second screen. My chat on the second screen. Thirdly, I use a cell phone, which I call what is called a BYOD monitor. It is bring your own device monitor. What that does, it shows me exactly what you're seeing on your screen. So it means that if I can't see it, you can't see it either. And that has worked very, very well, because sometimes you're there asking someone to read something. They have to be zooming. After they zoom in, they're moving to the left, they're moving to the right, they're doing everything.
Yes.
So using a certain size font on your computer, it's gonna take more time, gonna take more presentation, a lot more slides, but it will be one of the less distraction you have in the teaching process. I really enjoyed both presentation, and
thank you.
We just have to see what post-COVID.
Yeah,
so
where are you calling
for people to get a little bit more tutoring on Zoom and to teach them some of the tricks, I am available.
Which parish are you in?
I'm in Portmore.
Portmore, okay. I mean, if you want to drop your contact in the chat, you can, for people if they want to contact you. If you don't mind, preferably emails. Preferably emails.
I'm gonna put it. Yes, I'll put it on. I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing, and I really enjoyed the 2 days. I missed one day, but I hope it wasn't too much. Right, and I'm sure looking forward to any way I can contribute to helping to grow the science to the level that we want it to be, because we can only develop through science.
Yeah. Listen, go on JDTAN.org and join the Education Task Force, and we can continue talking on that. You can attend our meetings too. Okay? All right. Let's go. We have a few more. Javon, I'll unmute you. You ask your question. Javon Fitz Miller. And we have Jacqueline back. Thank God. Yes.
Sorry, it just dropped. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, it's fine. We did well, and we're glad you're back. We have a few minutes, like 7 minutes or so. Do we have a person asking a question, Jackie? Javon. Javon is a part of our Education Task Force. Go on, Javon. Wait, he's muted again.
Right. Hi, wonderful presentation. I'm in STEM myself, and I have an important question I'd like to ask. What is your view on the heavy use of technology in STEM in the form of stimulation and augmentation? Not the level of interest, but the level of efficiency. Because I hear the wonderful talks that you said about the senses, and that's great. We have developed a system where simulation and augmentation are key in terms of, like, for example, the parachute. It would be on your phone, and you can change the variables such as the size of the parachute or the length of the cord as to what you had mentioned, for example. But how efficient is it? Is it a good substitute, or your views on it? Thank you.
You mean sort of like, you mean data logging and sensing in that sense?
No, specifically, you would have a simulation on your phone that would take all of that into consideration. So you can adjust the size, like, for example, you have a size range on your phone where you can adjust the size of the, right, and the physics is all in the phone. So you are just watching the simulation using real world physics and seeing how quickly it falls and all of that jazz.
No, I think that's fine, because I do think that, for example, I know that one of the things, I train primary school teachers, so that's what I'm doing. I mean, for example, acceleration due to gravity, they can never grasp the idea that mass does not impact the rate of fall. So what I do is I get them to use the same film canisters and record using their phones. So I don't see anything wrong with that, because we use as much technology as possible to demonstrate different things.